They ruined my career by calling me a thief. For 3 years, my name was quietly erased from hiring lists before interviews even ended. Doors closed without explanation. Emails stopped coming. And every time I asked why, my father would smile and say, "You'll never make it without us." I used to believe him. After all, in a town like ours, reputation mattered more than truth, and my parents controlled both. I wasn't careless. I wasn't reckless. I had the degree, the skills, the discipline. But none of that mattered once my own family decided I needed to be taught a lesson. Then, last month, something changed. I finally landed an interview far away from home, far from their influence. I sat across the table, rehearsing answers in my head, when the door opened and the CEO walked in. He didn't ask about my resume. Instead, he looked at me and said, "Before we begin, I need to give you this. Your grandmother left it for you." He placed a sealed envelope on the table. It was dated 18 years ago. My name is Violet. I grew up believing that if you worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, and followed the rules, things would eventually work out. That's what my parents taught me, or at least, that's what they said they were teaching me. From the outside, my family looked solid, respectable. The kind of family neighbors pointed to and said, they did everything right. My father had a calm voice and a confident smile. My mother knew how to smooth over tension with silence. And I learned early that peace in our house didn't come from honesty, it came from obedience. The accusations started small, almost harmless. When I was in college, my parents gave me access to a family account for school-related expenses, tuition gaps, books, software, things like that. They told me not to worry. Said we'd sort it out later. So I trusted them. I kept receipts. I tracked everything. I never imagined it would be used against me. One evening, after I graduated, my father called me into the living room. He was sitting in his usual chair, hands folded, expression unreadable. My mother stood by the window, arms crossed tightly over her chest. He slid a bank statement across the table. "You took more than you should have," he said calmly. I remember blinking at the paper, confused. "I paid all of that back," I replied. "Every dollar. I showed you the receipts." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "That's not how it looks," he said. "And perception matters." That was the first time the word thief was spoken in my direction. Not directly, not yet, but I felt it forming in the air. Heavy. Dangerous. I tried to defend myself. I explained. I even apologized for the misunderstanding, though deep down I didn't know what I was apologizing for. My father listened, nodded once, then said something I'll never forget. "Actions have consequences, Violet. This will teach you responsibility." At the time, I thought the conversation ended there. It didn't. A few months later, after dozens of job applications, I noticed a pattern. Interviews went well. Too well. People smiled, complimented my resume, asked when I could start. Then, nothing. No rejection emails. No callbacks. Just silence. When I asked my parents for advice, my father shrugged. "Maybe employers can tell when someone isn't trustworthy," he said lightly, sipping his coffee. I laughed awkwardly, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. The truth revealed itself slowly, painfully, through fragments. A former classmate who avoided my eyes. A recruiter who ended a call abruptly after checking something. A hiring manager who hesitated, then said, "Your background raised concerns." Concerns. That word followed me everywhere. One night, I confronted my father directly. I asked him if he had said anything about me to anyone. He didn't deny it. He simply leaned back and looked at me the way you look at someone who has disappointed you deeply. "We were honest," he said. "People deserve to know who they're dealing with." My chest tightened. "You told them I stole from you?" He tilted his head slightly. "You took money without permission. Call it whatever you want." I felt my mother's presence behind me. I turned, hoping desperately that she would step in. Say something. Correct him. She didn't. That silence hurt more than his words. "You're exaggerating," my father continued. "This isn't permanent. Once you come back, once you accept that you need guidance, things can improve." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't punishment. It was leverage. They weren't trying to protect their reputation. They were trying to control my future. And for the first time in my life, I realized something terrifying. My family wasn't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing power over me. At first, I blamed myself. I told myself I must be saying the wrong thing in interviews. Maybe my answers sounded rehearsed. Maybe I wasn't confident enough. So I practiced harder. I stayed up late memorizing company websites, rewriting cover letters, timing my responses in front of the mirror. Nothing changed. The rejections became quieter, more polite, more distant. Sometimes there were no rejections at all, just silence, as if I'd never existed. I applied to accounting firms, local banks, insurance offices, even small family businesses that claimed they were always hiring. 15 applications turned into 20. 20 interviews turned into nothing. One afternoon, after what I was sure had been a perfect interview, I received a call from a recruiter I'd spoken to before. Her voice sounded careful, almost rehearsed. "Violet," she said, lowering her tone, "this isn't about your qualifications." My heart skipped. "Then what is it about?" She hesitated. I could hear her fingers tapping against her desk. "Off the record," she said finally, "your name came up in a conversation that made people nervous." "Nervous how?" Another pause, longer this time. "I think you should talk to your parents." The line went dead. I sat there, staring at my phone, the room suddenly too quiet. My parents. Why would they be involved in my job search at all? That night, I drove to their house. I hadn't planned to confront them, not really. I just wanted clarity, something solid I could hold on to instead of suspicion. My father was in his study when I arrived, reviewing paperwork as if he'd been expecting me. He didn't look surprised. "Still no luck?" he asked casually. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. "Did you say anything about me to employers?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. He looked up slowly, then smiled. Not warmly, not kindly. It was the smile of someone who believed they were in control. "We had conversations," he said. "That's all." My hands curled into fists. "Conversations about what?" "About trust," he replied. "About responsibility. About the incident with the money." "I paid that back," I said sharply. "You know I did." He shrugged. "That's your version." I felt my chest tighten. "So you told them I was a thief?" "I told them to be cautious," he corrected. "If that cost you a few opportunities, maybe that's unfortunate but necessary." "Necessary for what?" I asked. "To remind you," he said calmly, "that you don't get to walk away from this family and expect the world to welcome you with open arms." I couldn't speak. The words felt too heavy. My mother appeared in the doorway, hands clasped together. She looked tired. Smaller than I remembered. "Your father just wants what's best for you," she said softly. "This town talks. People notice things." "So, you let them destroy my reputation?" I asked, turning to her. "You let them think I'm dishonest?" She looked away. That answer told me everything. Within weeks, I felt it everywhere. At the grocery store, people I'd grown up with suddenly avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when I walked past. Smiles felt forced. Polite, the story had spread. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough to make sure no one trusted me. I was blacklisted without ever being charged, judged without ever being heard. And the worst part wasn't losing jobs, it was realizing how easily my parents had rewritten who I was. One night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my father's words echoing in my head. "You'll never make it without us." For the first time, I wondered if he wasn't predicting my failure, but planning it. There's a moment when rejection stops hurting. Not because it gets easier, but because you run out of strength to react. That's where I was by the end of the first year. My savings were gone, my student loan grace period had ended, and the polite excuses from employers had turned into quiet avoidance. I stopped checking my email every 5 minutes. I stopped refreshing my voicemail. Hope had become something expensive I could no longer afford. I took the first job that didn't ask questions. It wasn't in accounting. It wasn't even close. I worked nights at a small hotel on the edge of town, folding sheets, cleaning rooms, doing everything people pretended not to notice unless it wasn't done perfectly. The uniform was stiff and faded, the hours long, the pay barely enough to cover rent. But it was work. And for a while, I told myself that was enough. I kept my head down. I showed up early. I didn't complain. I told myself this was temporary, that once I had income, once I survived long enough, something would open up again. What I didn't expect was my family. One evening, near the end of my shift, I heard a familiar laugh echo through the hallway. Deep, confident, too loud for the space. My father. I froze. I watched from behind my supply cart as my parents and my older brother walked into the hotel restaurant like they owned the place. My father wore one of his tailored jackets. My mother smiled politely at the hostess. My brother looked bored, scrolling on his phone. Then my father saw me. His face lit up. "Well," he said loudly, pointing in my direction. "Look at that." Every head in the lobby turned. "So this is where you ended up," he continued, his voice smooth and satisfied. "Hard work builds character, doesn't it?" My hands tightened around the cart handle. I could feel my face burning. My brother laughed. "Careful, Violet," he added. "Don't forget to check the corners. Wouldn't want anything going missing." A few people chuckled. Others looked away. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. Because saying anything would have meant giving them what they wanted, proof that I was still affected, still reachable, still small enough to be hurt. My father raised his glass in a mock toast as they were seated. "See?" he said, just loud enough. "You're learning. This is good for you." That night, something inside me went quiet. Not broken, hardened. When I got home, I sat on the floor of my apartment, still in uniform, and stared at the wall until the sun came up. I realized then that this wasn't about discipline or disappointment. They wanted me visible in my failure. They wanted me close enough to watch. A week later, my father called. His voice was warm, almost kind. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said. "This has gone on long enough. I knew what was coming. You can come home," he continued. "We'll help you get back on your feet. I might even make a few calls clear things up." I swallowed. "And the condition?" A pause. "You work with me," he said. "You listen. You stop trying to do things on your own. In other words, surrender." I looked around my small apartment, the cracked paint, the mismatched furniture, the silence. Part of me was exhausted enough to say yes, to trade freedom for relief. But another part of me, the part my grandmother had nurtured, whispered something different. If I went back now, I would never leave again. "I need time to think," I said. His tone changed instantly. "You don't have much," he replied. "And without us, you have nothing." The line went dead. That night, I made a decision. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I knew this. If I stayed in that town, they would eventually erase me completely. And I couldn't let that happen. I didn't tell anyone about the decision I made that night. Not my coworkers. Not my friends. And definitely not my family. I simply stopped applying for jobs in town. Instead, I widened the map. Cities I'd never visited. Companies I'd only heard about in passing. Places where the Harper name meant nothing, where my father couldn't casually have a conversation and poison the ground before I even arrived. Late at night, after my shift ended, I sat on the edge of my bed with my laptop balanced on my knees. I sent out applications quietly, carefully, no posts, no announcements, no hints. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving without being watched. That's when I found my grandmother's old phone. It was buried at the bottom of a box I'd carried with me through 3 apartments. The screen was cracked. The battery long dead. I almost threw it away, but something made me pause. I charged it. When it turned on, notifications flooded the screen. Missed messages, old emails, and one voicemail from years ago, dated just a few weeks after my grandmother passed away. My heart started pounding before I even pressed play. "Hello, this is Michael Reeves from Reeves & Cole Legal Services," the voice said. "I'm calling regarding the estate of Eleanor Brooks. There are documents that require Violet Harper's attention. Please return our call at your earliest convenience." I listened to it 3 times. I had never received that message. Or rather, I never knew I had. I remembered that time clearly, the numb weeks after the funeral. The way my father had taken over everything. The paperwork, the phone calls. He'd told me it was all handled. That night, I called the law firm. The receptionist sounded confused when I explained who I was. She typed for a long moment, then said, "It looks like our office tried to reach you several times. Eventually, a family representative informed us you were no longer interested." My stomach dropped. A family representative? I asked. Yes, your father. I hung up and sat there in the dark, phone pressed to my ear, breathing shallowly. He hadn't just sabotaged my career, he had intercepted my escape. Everything my grandmother warned me about the control, the quiet decisions made on my behalf, the doors closed without my consent, it all snapped into place. I finally understood why she used to look at me so seriously when she talked about independence. Why she always said, "Some help arrives too early to recognize." The next morning, my father called. His voice was gentle, practiced. "Your mother is worried about you," he said. "This struggle, it's unnecessary. You could come home. We can fix this." Fix. That word meant obedience. "I found Grandma's voicemail," I said quietly. There was a pause on the line, just long enough. "That was nothing," he replied. "Old paperwork. You don't need to dig into the past." But I already had. That night, I booked a bus ticket out of town. No goodbye. No explanation. Just a destination I chose for myself. For the first time, I wasn't running toward something familiar. I was running away from the people who never wanted me free. And somewhere deep down, I felt it, the certainty that my grandmother hadn't prepared something small. She had prepared me for this moment. The bus ride took 6 hours, but it felt longer. Not because of the distance, but because every mile put space between me and the version of myself my family had worked so hard to trap. I watched familiar streets blur into highways, then into stretches of road I couldn't name. I kept my phone on silent the entire time. No calls, no messages. I didn't want to know if anyone noticed I was gone. I arrived in the city just after sunset with one suitcase, a folder of resumes, and $42 left in my account. The motel I chose was nothing special. Faded sign. Flickering hallway lights. The kind of place people stayed when they didn't plan to be seen. The room smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet, but the door locked properly, and that was enough. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the walls for a long time. This was it. No backup plan. No safety net. No family to fall back on. Just me. That night, I opened my laptop and checked my email one last time before sleeping, more out of habit than hope. That's when I saw it. Subject: interview invitation. At first, I thought it was spam. Then I read the sender's name. My breath caught in my throat. I read the email once. Then again. Then a third time. Slower. They weren't asking for a phone screening. They weren't routing me to HR. They wanted an in-person interview. And not just with a department manager. With senior leadership, the email said. I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. The sound startled me in the quiet room. Companies like that didn't interview people like me. Not people with employment gaps. Not people without referrals. Not people whose reputations had been quietly poisoned before they ever spoke for themselves. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my finger hovering over the reply button. What if this was another setup? Another door opening just long enough to slam shut again? Then I thought about my father. About how confident he always was that the world would eventually force me back to him. And I hit reply. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. I stood in the bathroom, smoothing my hair, pressing my blazer flat with my hands because I didn't own an iron. The woman staring back at me in the mirror looked thinner than I remembered, more tired. But there was something else there, too, something sharp and unfamiliar. Resolve. I arrived at the building 20 minutes early. It rose above the street in glass and steel, reflecting the sky like it belonged there. I hesitated outside for a moment, adjusting my bag strap, grounding myself. This wasn't my father's town. This wasn't his territory. Inside, the lobby was quiet and expansive. Polished floors, soft voices, people moving with purpose, like they knew exactly where they were going. I felt out of place and painfully aware of it. You'll never make it without us. The voice echoed in my head, uninvited. I approached the front desk and gave my name. The receptionist typed for a moment, then smiled. Yes, Miss Harper. They're expecting you. They. That single word made my stomach flip. I was led into a conference room with a long table and floor-to-ceiling windows. The city stretched out below, distant and unreal. I placed my resume neatly in front of me, folded my hands, and waited. Minutes passed. I practiced answers in my head. I reminded myself to breathe. I told myself that even if this failed, it would fail honestly, not because someone had decided my fate behind closed doors. Then the door opened. A man stepped inside, mid-50s, composed, with a presence that filled the room without demanding attention. He closed the door gently behind him and looked at me not like an interviewer scanning a candidate, but like someone confirming something he'd already suspected. "Violet Harper," he said. "Yes," I replied, standing instinctively. He gestured for me to sit, then took the seat across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I'm Daniel," he said finally. "Thank you for coming." I nodded. "Thank you for the opportunity." He studied my face for a second longer, then glanced down at his briefcase. "Before we begin," he said slowly, "there's something I need to give you." My heart skipped. This wasn't how interviews started. He opened the briefcase and removed an envelope, placing it carefully on the table between us. It was old, thick, the edges softened by time. I knew the handwriting instantly. My grandmother's. I felt a tightness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. "This was left with our legal department," Daniel continued, watching my reaction closely, "with very specific instructions." I swallowed. "Instructions for what?" "For you," he said. He paused, letting the weight of that settle. "It was only to be given to you under one condition," he went on. "If you ever applied here." My hands began to shake. I rested them on my lap, afraid that if I touched the envelope too soon, something would break inside me or around me. "It's dated 18 years ago," he added quietly. 18 years. I looked up at him, my mind racing. "My grandmother, she planned this?" I asked. Daniel nodded. "She was very clear, very precise." I stared at the envelope, my grandmother's handwriting blurring as tears filled my eyes. Suddenly, every strange thing made sense. Her warnings, her insistence on independence, the way she used to say, "Some doors are built long before you need them." End quote. "What's inside?" I whispered. Daniel met my gaze, his expression steady but kind. "That," he said, "is your grandmother making sure no one ever gets to decide your future for you again." And in that moment, before the envelope was opened, before the truth was fully revealed, I understood something with absolute clarity. Everything my parents had done, every closed door, every whispered accusation, it hadn't been random. They had been trying to keep me from this. I didn't open the envelope right away. My fingers rested on the edge of the table, so close that I could feel the texture of the paper beneath the air between us. The wax seal faded, cracked with age, looked impossibly fragile for something that had survived nearly 2 decades untouched. 18 years. My grandmother had written my name when I was still a child, back when I believed adults always told the truth, back when I thought family automatically meant safety. "Take your time," Daniel said gently. "There's no rush." I nodded, though my heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I broke the seal. The sound was soft, almost polite, nothing like the moment it represented. Inside the envelope were several documents, neatly folded, carefully preserved. On top was a letter, handwritten in the elegant, slanted script I had memorized from birthday cards and notes tucked into my backpack when I was young. "My Violet, if you're reading this, then you found your way here." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Daniel leaned back in his chair, giving me space. The room felt impossibly quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath. "I couldn't protect you the way I wanted to," the letter continued. "Not openly, not directly. But I've learned that protection doesn't always look like presence. Sometimes it looks like preparation." My hands trembled as I turned the page. She wrote about watching my parents over the years, about control disguised as concern, about how often decisions were made for me instead of with me. She didn't use dramatic language. She didn't need to. Every sentence was calm, observant, certain. I knew that one day, you would need a door they couldn't close. Beneath the letter were legal documents, trust agreements, ownership records, notarized statements. I scanned the first page, my mind struggling to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice barely steady. "This says..." He nodded. "Yes." According to the documents, my grandmother had established a trust in my name when I was still a minor. She had invested early in the company quietly, deliberately, and placed the shares under legal protection. They weren't symbolic. They weren't conditional. They were mine. "What does this mean?" I asked, overwhelmed. "It means," Daniel said carefully, That you're not just here asking for a job. You're here as someone your grandmother trusted enough to secure a future for. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to slow my breathing. But my father, I said. He told me she left nothing significant. He handled everything. Daniel's expression darkened slightly, not with anger, but with understanding. We know, he said. Your father contacted our firm years ago. He claimed to represent your interests. He declined further communication on your behalf. My stomach dropped. He blocked this, I said. Yes, Daniel replied. But legally, he couldn't undo it. The trust was sealed, independent, protected. I let out a shaky breath. All those years, all that control, and still, she had outmaneuvered him. There's more, Daniel added, sliding another document forward. It was a letter from a legal firm, dated recently. Your father had called them, warned them about me, questioned my character. He told us you were dishonest, Daniel said calmly. That hiring you would be a risk. I closed my eyes. And? I asked. And he didn't realize he was speaking about someone with documented legal standing tied to this company. For the first time since I'd entered the room, I laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't joyful. It was the sound of pressure finally releasing. So he tried to destroy my last chance, I said slowly. Without knowing it was the one thing he couldn't touch. Daniel nodded. Exactly. I looked down at my grandmother's letter again. You don't owe obedience to anyone who uses love as leverage. Build something that belongs to you. Tears streamed freely now. I didn't wipe them away. All those nights I thought I was alone. All those times I believed I had no options. She had been planning quietly, patiently, the entire time. I didn't come here for revenge, I said, my voice breaking. I just wanted a chance. Daniel leaned forward slightly. And that, he said, is why she trusted you. He paused, then added, There's one more thing you should know. I scanted. I looked up. Your father called again this morning, he said. He was very confident, very certain that one more phone call would end this interview before it began. My jaw tightened. What did you tell him? I asked. Daniel's gaze was steady. I told him we value integrity, and that we verify claims carefully. I swallowed. And now? I asked. Now, he replied, you get to decide what happens next. I stared at the documents spread before me, proof of foresight, protection, and love that had outlived control. For the first time in years, my future wasn't being negotiated behind my back. It was sitting right in front of me, and I was finally free to choose it. I didn't leave the building right away. Daniel gave me time to breathe, time to reread the documents, time to let the reality settle into something solid. When I finally stood, my legs felt weak, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. Whatever you decide, Daniel said as we walked toward the door, you won't be facing it alone. That sentence stayed with me. For so long, every major decision in my life had been framed as rebellion. Independence had been treated like betrayal. But here, finally choice felt neutral. Safe. Mine. By the time I stepped outside, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Missed calls. Unread messages. My name lighting up the screen like a warning. My father. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat on a bench across the street and watched people hurry past, unaware that my entire life had just shifted. I opened my email. There it was. An offer letter. Clear. Formal. Carefully worded. Not charity. Not pity. Opportunity. I accepted it before doubt could catch up to me. That evening, my father called again. This time I answered. Violet, he said sharply, dropping all pretense. What do you think you're doing? I stayed calm. I went to an interview. You were warned, he snapped. You don't get to do this without consequences. I almost laughed. For years, I said. You made sure I believed that. There was a pause on the line, short but telling. You embarrassed us, he continued. You're dragging this family into places it doesn't belong. No, I replied quietly. I'm stepping out of the ones you trapped me in. His voice hardened. You don't understand how this works. People talk. Reputations matter. I know, I said. That's why I'm letting the truth speak for itself. He scoffed. Truth is what people believe. Not when there's paperwork, I replied. Silence. For the first time in my life, my father didn't have a response ready. The following days moved quickly. Too quickly. My new employer conducted routine background verification, the kind my father had always weaponized against me. This time, it worked differently. Statements were requested. Claims were cross-checked. Timelines compared. What had once been whispers became contradictions. Then, questions. A former hiring manager reached out with an apology. A recruiter admitted they'd been warned. Someone forwarded me an email my father had sent years ago, polite, vague, damaging. He hadn't expected anyone to look closely. That was his mistake. By the end of the week, my parents' carefully managed image began to crack. Not publicly, not dramatically, just enough. My mother called first. Her voice was small, uncertain. "We didn't think it would go this far," she said. "Your father was just trying to guide you." "I know," I replied. "But guidance doesn't require erasing someone." She cried softly. I let her. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had kept me alive for years, but now it wasn't necessary. My brother texted next. A short message. No apology, just confusion. "Dad says you turned everyone against us." I didn't respond, because the truth didn't need my participation anymore. It was moving on its own quietly, steadily undoing years of narrative with facts my grandmother had locked into place long before I knew I'd need them. One afternoon, Daniel forwarded me a final note. My father had called again, demanded explanations, threatened legal action, insisted everything was a misunderstanding. Daniel's reply had been brief. "We stand by our decision. Further contact should be directed through counsel." When I read it, I felt something loosen in my chest. The control was gone, not taken by force, not destroyed. Simply, no longer effective. That night, I sat alone in my motel room, the same one that had felt like refuge days earlier, and realized something profound. I hadn't won by confronting my father. I'd won by becoming unreachable. My life didn't change overnight. There was no dramatic moment where everything suddenly felt perfect. No applause, no instant peace. What came instead was something quieter and far more real. Stability. I moved into a small apartment near my new office. Nothing fancy. Just clean windows, steady light in the mornings, and a door that locked behind me by choice, not fear. I bought groceries without checking my balance 3 times. I slept through the night without replaying old conversations in my head. For the first time, my days were shaped by decisions I made, not by consequences someone else designed for me. Work was challenging. I made mistakes. I asked questions. I learned. And no one treated those things as proof that I didn't deserve to be there. I was evaluated on my work, not on a story someone had told about me years ago. That alone felt revolutionary. My mother called once more. She asked if we could be a family again. I told her the truth. "I forgive you," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean access." She didn't argue. She just listened. That was new. My father never called again. And I realized I didn't need him to, because the absence of his voice no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space. A few weeks later, I visited my grandmother's grave. I brought fresh flowers and sat on the cool grass beside her headstone, holding the letter she'd written all those years ago. The paper was soft now, worn thin at the creases. "You knew," I whispered. "You saw it before I did." She hadn't saved me with money alone. She saved me with foresight, with legal protection, with the understanding that love sometimes looks like preparation, not rescue. She didn't fight my battles for me. She made sure I would survive them. If you're listening to this and you feel trapped by family expectations, by financial dependence, by a story someone else wrote about who you are, I want you to hear this clearly. Wanting independence is not betrayal. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. And leaving a place that harms you does not make you ungrateful. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop asking for permission to live your own life. I still keep my grandmother's letter. It reminds me that even when doors close quietly, others may be opening in ways you can't see yet. That truth, when backed by preparation and patience, eventually outruns control. They ruined my career by calling me a thief, but they couldn't ruin my future. Because it was never theirs to own. And now, it finally belongs to me.